Hello and welcome to Beginning of Wisdom. I'm Andrew Schumacher. This video is the latest in a series I started a while ago called The Cross and the Torah, which looks at Hebrew roots and Torah observance arguments and claims and examines them in light of Scripture. My goal for this series is to be a library of videos addressing all the most popular claims they make. After the video, go check out my playlist. Now, if you've been around the Hebrew Roots movement for a while, you're certainly familiar with their need to explain away the New Covenant. The New Covenant presents a problem for them simply because their theology, instead of being based on careful exegesis, is based on a principle of old equals good and new equals bad. There's also the fact that the book of Hebrews clearly teaches that the New Covenant replaces the covenant with Israel made through Moses at Mount Sinai. Since all the laws that talk about the stuff they want everyone to do are found in that covenant, it's kind of a problem for them if a new one makes the old one pass away. So how do they get around it? I've seen two primary methods. Number one, they claim it's not really new, but renewed, so no change really. Or number two, they push it off into the future so that it doesn't apply to any of us now. In this video, we're going to examine the first of these methods. Is the New Covenant really renewed, meaning everything in the Old Covenant carries over? Now, if you're sharp, you'll have noticed that this really is two questions. First, is the covenant new or renewed? And second, if it is renewed, does that mean everything from the first covenant carries over? And so we come to the first problem with this argument. Those who argue for a renewed covenant never really go on to make the biblical case that this renewal must mean that everything carries over. That is just assumed. So even if the argument for renewed works, it doesn't prove enough. Don't be fooled. They're not arguing for that further point. They're just smuggling it in. But let's get to that first question. That's why you're here. Is it a new or renewed covenant? I'll let one of the videos out there promoting the renewal view make this argument. It makes a lot of arguments, but we'll just focus on this one about new meaning renewed.
New or renewed covenant. Many Christians say that we are in a new covenant and the old is done away with. They say that the Torah is done away with and the Old Testament, also known as the Old Covenant, has ended. Did you know that the idea of a brand new covenant isn't biblical? Instead, God speaks of a restored, renewed, and repaired covenant. This renewed covenant is already in place with God and man. It's the first half of the Bible. Let's define what the word new and how this new, or should we say renewed, covenant works with the Torah and the church today. Let's look at the word new. It's Strong's word 2318. It's Hadesh, and it means to rebuild, restore, repair, renew. So there really isn't a new covenant or New Testament. It's the same covenant, same testament, only renewed and restored thanks to Yeshua.
So Michael Rood also makes an argument, an appeal to this in a little bit less convincing way here.
Behold, the days come, saith Yahweh, I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Now, this is the only place that we hear the words new covenant spoken of by the prophets. In fact, it is Chodesh. It is renewed covenant. It is not a new covenant, it's a renewed covenant. That's why when Yeshua, the night of the Last Supper, says, this is in King James, the New Testament in my blood, ain't no such thing. It's a mistranslation. Now, we got a letter from a gentleman that says, I've looked up the words new covenant or New Testament in the Greek, and it doesn't say new, it says fresh. It doesn't say renewed, it says fresh. Well, it doesn't matter what the Greek says, because the Greek does not have a concept. It is talking about when Yeshua said, this is the renewed covenant in my blood. He's taking us back to the prophecy of Jeremiah.
Okay, so both John Lawson in the first clip and Michael Rood are presenting the idea that the underlying Hebrew word, kadash, means renewed. Is that true? Let's look at that section of the Lawson clip again.
It's Strong's word 2318. It's hadesh, and it means to rebuild, restore, repair, renew.
Okay, 2318, right. Let's look that up here on Bible Hub. So 2318. Let's see what it says. So, okay, it looks like you've got the Greek or the Hebrew. We'll go for the Hebrew. And there's our word. Kadash means renew, repair. We look at the New American Standard Translation, repair, restore. All those words he was pointing out for sure. Okay, so far so good. Let's take a look over here. We've got the different occurrences, and it looks like, scrolling down, there are 10 of them. So let's take a look at those. So we've got, 1 Samuel, renew the kingdom, restore the altar, restore the house. This makes a lot of sense. Renew a steadfast spirit within me. That's from the Psalm. Very good, very good. Okay. Looks like repair the ruin, something there in Isaiah. And then Lamentations, renew our days. So very good. So it means renew for sure. But wait hold on. We got a problem. Lamentations, as you may know, was written by Jeremiah, comes after the book of Jeremiah. But I don't see any Jeremiah here. Now, this was all supposed to come from Jeremiah 31:31, the new covenant. So what's going on there? Let's go take a look at Jeremiah and see what's going on. So Jeremiah 31:31 I have pulled up here as well, and the words are all out of order, but that's just because this is interlinear. But here's the word we're looking for, new covenant, right down here. And I see, there it is, 23:19. Well, let's pull that up and take a look. Is that our word? Wait a minute. So he said 23:18.
It's Strong's word 23:18.
But the Jeremiah passage has 23:19. It's a different number. Okay, so 23:19. And I can see the confusion here. If you look at this spelling, this is the English, but even down here, if you look at the Hebrew right there, you've got Kadash and Kadash. So if you look close, I'll switch back and forth here. And you see what I've got there, 23:19 and 23:18. It's the same three Hebrew letters. So what's the difference? Well, if you look close, here's what we can see. 23:18 we see is a verb. So this is the word being used as a verb, and 23:19 is an adjective. And 23:19 is what we found in Jeremiah. Now, for those of you who didn't pay much attention in your English class, a verb is an action word. It's something you do, right? And an adjective is a descriptive word for a noun, a person, place, thing, concept, something like that. So now you're going to get a lesson in biblical studies. We are clearly dealing with two forms of the same Hebrew root word, the verb and the adjective. So the question we should be asking is how the words get used throughout Scripture. We looked already a bit at the verb. It really does get translated in the terms the Hebrew roots teachers are talking about. But the verb is not in Jeremiah. the adjective is. So let's take a look at those. So coming back over here and looking at 23:19, the adjective. Let's go ahead and scroll down here. There are a lot more occurrences as an adjective. It says 53. And let's take a look at these. So just the first couple here says, now a new king arose. Right, a new king. And this is from Exodus 1:8. This is the verse about a new king arose in Egypt that did not remember Joseph. So it's definitely not a renewed king. That doesn't even really make much sense. But I mean, certainly in the context, it's definitely a new king, not a renewed anything. Leviticus 23:16 says, you shall present a new grain offering. Again, I don't really understand how one would renew a grain offering. Obviously, this is from the harvest. This is new grain to be offered, and so as we kind of go down, we see new grain offering, new house. You build a new house. You can't really build a renewed house. You can renew a house that's already built. Take a new wife. Well, that's in context, that's a new wife. That's not renewed doesn't really fit there. Deuteronomy 32 says new gods who came. This is about them worshiping demonic forces. And it literally says, if you read that passage in Deuteronomy 32, it says, well, you see it right there in the NAS, gods you have not known. So there's no such thing as renewed gods. These are gods they had not known. They were new to them. Let's see, we're new. It looks like maybe he's talking about wineskins. I'm not clicking into all of these, but new gods, new ropes. And again, this is in Judges, this is from the Samson passage where it even talks about which have not been used. So that's definitely new in that case. Prepare a new cart. They put they put the ark on a new cart. That's what those passages are talking about. Had a new sword, new cloak. Again, I mean, new sword, new cloak. I guess you could try to say that such a thing could be renewed, but nothing from the text is telling us that. And then we've got Chronicles, which is kind of reiterating stuff. But new wineskins in Job. You can't use old wineskins. You can't renew wineskins. You need new ones. Okay, then Psalms talking about different, just new song. I'll sing a new song. Oh, Ecclesiastes, you look, is something new? No, it isn't new. It's already been there. In that context, nothing new under the sun, because everything comes from something else. Even new things came from somewhere, that isn't new. So coming into Isaiah, it looks like I've made you a new sharp something. Don't know that one off the top of my head. I will declare new things, that you haven't heard. Again, we got a new song again, something new things from this time. You'll be called by a new name. Yeah, new heavens, new earth. Yes, could you speak of these as being renewed? Possibly. So in a small minority, we might have things that we could, maybe translate as renewed, but it's certainly not universal. That's that much we know for sure, and it's not even the normal way. Now here we come to Jeremiah 31. I make a new covenant. I'll give you a new heart, new spirit. And so, yeah, it's speaking of, putting a new spirit in us. It's not an old spirit. To us, it's a new spirit. And that's the Spirit of God. Obviously, that's infinitely old. But it's certainly not renewed either. God's Spirit is ever new. It's not something that needs to be renewed. So yeah, there's by and large, it means new. It doesn't mean renewed. But remember what Michael Rood said. Remember that?
In fact, it is Kodesh. It is renewed covenant. It is not a new covenant. It's a renewed covenant. In King James, the New Testament in my blood ain't no such thing.
It's a mistranslation.
Kodesh.
So this is the word here in Jeremiah. And he's saying, oh, it definitely doesn't mean that. It definitely means renewed. Well, we saw that most of the time it can't mean renewed.
Renewed.
And, you know, for a tiny fraction, you could potentially try to force that in there, but you can't. It's certainly not required. Like it's only required in one verse out of all the ones that we saw, if your theology requires it, you see. So we have something pretty consistent going on here. When the word is used as a verb, it means to renew, to restore. And when it's used as an adjective, it means new. That's the overwhelming testimony of what we see here. And not in no case do I see the requirement that the adjective should be translated as renewed. There's no indication that's ever the case. So let's look again at the words themselves. So the verb kadash, and you can see here the phonetic spelling that I'm getting, kadash, means to renew, whereas the adjective kadash means new. It just means new in the Hebrew. So what does this tell us about our Hebrew Roots teachers that we're looking at right now? Michael Rood is either an incredibly bold liar, willing to tell you something about a Hebrew word that is literally the opposite of what you will find when you look it up, or he's utterly incompetent to handle the Hebrew, and everything that he says about it should be taken as suspect. You couldn't get more wrong than what he said. John Lawson doesn't make such sweeping statements, but in a way, you could actually say he's even more clearly lying. He cites the wrong Strong's number, talking about Jeremiah 31:31, in order to make it fit his argument. His video isn't like Michael Rood's in that it's sort of an extemporaneous speech that is being presented uncut. It is a carefully crafted, scripted video with graphics to show you everything that he's saying and back it up. Not only does he cite the wrong Strong's number, but he even puts it on the screen.
It's Strong's word 2318. It's Hadesh, and it means to rebuild, restore, repair, renew.
And when you realize that the verb and adjective forms of a word get different Strong numbers, you can catch it right away. And notice how he reads the verbs to go along with 2318.
And it means to rebuild, restore, repair, renew.
That's because it's a verb. But the word in Jeremiah isn't a verb. But you remember what he said at the beginning of the video about what the new covenant is like?
Instead, God speaks of a restored, renewed, and repaired covenant.
You see, he changes it from the verb
to rebuild, restore, repair, renew,
which is what the Strong's number is about, to the adjective.
God speaks of a restored, renewed, and repaired covenant. To rebuild, restore, repair, renew. Restored, renewed, and repaired.
Which is a different number. It is not the one there. And the fact is, as we saw, when you look up the verse, it gives you the correct Strong's number. You have to go looking for the other one to find the definition that he liked. The word in Jeremiah isn't a verb, and he knows it. Now, do we have any other reasons to believe that the new covenant is really new and not something that's renewed from the Sinai covenant? It's funny, really, when you look at it. The insistence that it's renewed just flies in the face of the text itself. Let's just look at the text. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant which I made with their fathers in the day I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant which they broke, although I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. But this is the covenant which I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and on their heart I will write it, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. They will not teach again each man his neighbor, and each man his brother, saying, Know the Lord. For they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and their sin I will remember no more. So the passage clearly starts by saying the new covenant will be not like the covenant specifically made with the ancestors brought out of Egypt. That's Sinai. So we know the contrast. The rest of the passage goes on to discuss the ways in which it is not like the Mosaic Covenant. Number one, I will put my law in their inward parts and write it on their hearts. The law of the new covenant is to be obeyed from the heart, not just as a national law like Sinai was. Number two, I will be their God and they will be my people. Israel was a mixed group in terms of their relationship with God. Some truly loved and followed God, but many did not. The new covenant will have people who love God and no one else. Number three, they will not teach each other to know God, for they will all know God. All members of the new covenant are redeemed and know God. This is the specific content of the teaching that is not necessary in the new covenant. Again, because everyone knows God, no one is to be taught to know God in the covenant. This is not to say there's no teaching in the new covenant, only that the people in that covenant will not need to be taught to know God, because they already will. Number four, I will forgive their iniquity and no longer remember their sin. All members of this covenant are forgiven of their sin, and God will never remember it. This is different from Sinai because that covenant provided only an earthly atonement, and that not even for all sins. It did not mean God would no longer remember their sins. The new covenant, he no longer will. All these things are new with the new covenant when compared to the Mosaic covenant. This is not to say that God never forgave sins or that no one knew God before the new covenant, only that these things were not part of previous covenants. Certainly the covenant with Abraham foretold things that the new covenant fulfills. But the new covenant is specifically contrasted with the Mosaic covenant in place at the time of Jeremiah. This is the new covenant that is contrasted with the old covenant being replaced by it. None of this makes sense if you erroneously and against all the rules of Hebrew mistranslate new as renewed. And it isn't as if Christians today or even during the patristic era were the first to think this way. The prophecy of the new covenant found in Jeremiah is found in the book of Hebrews, where it is written in Greek. Hebrews 8:8 says God will ratify a new kainos covenant. That's Strong's 2537. Let's take a look at that in Hebrews 8:8. So here we see the verse, once again interlinear, and he says, I will ratify with the house of Israel, with the house of Judah, a new kainen covenant, 25:37. And here we see the word means fresh, new, unused, novel. It just means new, not renewed. And as we look over here to the right and look at these different examples, into fresh wineskins, we've seen that before. Things new and old, out of treasure. I will drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom, talking about the Passover, the Lord's Supper there, a new teaching. Again, none of these make any sense if you're trying to say it means renewed. So what Michael Rood said about the Greek, or what his letter writer said, was true. The Greek definitely just means new. So the author of Hebrews, when citing the text of Jeremiah, uses the word for new in Greek. But that isn't just because the author of Hebrews thinks that this is just the right Greek word. The author of Hebrews is citing the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Old Testament created by Jews hundreds of years before Christ. This shows that Jewish believers understood kadosh in the original Hebrew to mean the same thing as kainos in Greek, new, all the way back hundreds of years before Christ. The new covenant really is new. Now, that wasn't very hard. I guess now we know why not all Hebrew Roots folks try to say it's a renewed covenant, and when the language just doesn't work that way. This is also why there's a whole lot of explaining about what it means for the covenant to be renewed, but precious little argument from the text or argument for the translation. That would require looking at the evidence as we've done today, and looking at the evidence doesn't really work out so well for these guys. Now, if you've enjoyed this, I have a whole playlist, as I mentioned before, under the cross and the Torah, where you can see other bad arguments for Hebrew Roots dismantled, as well as some videos dismantling the foundations of Torah observance itself. If you have questions about this or any other biblical or theological issues, feel free to drop a comment. Until the next time, remember that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.